curious about your position on what is becoming a huge movement within psychology, evidence-based or empirically validated or whatever phrase happens to be in fashion. What is your take on that development?
It makes me crazy.
Okay.
And here's the reason. So much of research in psychology is bad research. Published research, peer-reviewed journals, I don't care. It's terrible research. When I was an undergraduate at Radcliffe and Harvard back in the late 60s, Bruce Baker, who's now at UCLA, taught a course, and he would give us published articles, and he would say, write a 3-page critique of everything that's wrong with it. And we'd say, oh my God, this is the Rosenthal experiment or bias research. There won't be anything wrong with this. This is the truth. This is a classic. And he would say, just look at it. We'd say, oh. And we would find that, because when you're trying to do research on human behavior, it's extremely hard to do good research. All right. So what I'm saying, I'm not saying that to trash people who do psychological research. It's extremely hard to do good research. You either do it in the laboratory, which isn't a realistic situation, so there are those limitations, and people do not always take care to make clear how limiting those factors are. They just say, here's what we found, and then everybody thinks, oh, they found the truth. Or if you don't do it in a laboratory, if you do it in a natural setting, then you cannot control most of the important variables, and so you don't really know a lot about what you're finding. And then yes, there are some people who do research as though they've never taken a research methodology course, and it gets published. And so trying to take the field of research that relates to the practice of psychotherapy and figure out how do we use what in what situation. Somebody comes to see me and they're having a problem. This is an entire complex, nuanced person. Nobody's ever done research on them. There's probably very little research on their particular problems in their particular context with whatever strengths and resources they have. And so the question of who's going to get to decide what is good enough research, you don't find perfect studies in psychology. So who's going to decide what's good enough research? Who's going to decide, all right, this study for evidence-based psychotherapy, this study we should take with a grain of salt, this with 3 grains of salt. What can we learn? I have undergraduates write papers in which I say, take the last 10 studies published on this topic area, or take one from each of the last 10 years, or whatever. And then say, study number 1, here are the pros and cons. Here's what's good about the study. Here are the problems with it. Study number 2, and go through those. And then make a state-of-the-art summary comment at the end. And say, in light of these problems, here is what we do know. Now, compare it to what those authors say they found, and people think to be the truth. Very big difference. And so who's going to decide what the standards are supposed to be? Who's going to sit there with you and see if you're applying it correctly? I think in principle it's an absolutely wonderful idea, but it is based on the very false premise that there's a lot of really well done research in psychology that has results that clearly apply in very obvious ways to what we should be doing with particular therapy patients.